But what I was trying to say about the flywheel too, I think that that's important with going back to the training that I have with acting and storytelling and with basically creating narratives. When you're creating a script or something like that, you're creating, like, you have to create the entire world, and you have to make sure that the physics of that weird world operate differently than the current world that we're seeing with some sort of fantasy thing or whatever. They have to be logically consistent to a certain degree too. So when you're crafting a world, you have to make sure that all the pieces line up. But the interesting thing about that is that when you get to the end, you can then re-edit it and go to the beginning. So you can basically craft this entire narrative that works as a flywheel. Works as a flywheel. Works as a flywheel. That's perfect in its own system. And that's what I think is the correlation to the real world with things like the allopathic system, or what I just talked about with the law and teaching people how to obey the government, is if you build that system and you basically just nail every point of that, then you have a self-contained narrative and a self-contained story that people play out in the real world without even knowing it, because they're not aware of the way that the narrative was constructed.
Yeah. And it's like people's perspective can't even conceptualize and sort of look down on the world that was created for them.
Manifesting things in my, like, okay, so the Fringe FM and Lighting the Void, I'm this whole thing has been based on magic and faith. That doesn't sound very practical to people, right? You know, people are like, how did you go 4 or 5 years and, you know, being a parent, living and all this other stuff, traveling, everything that you've done, without, you know, working a job or making sure you have a 401k or whatever that people are taught to do? It's because I believe in manifestation. I truly believe that when you visualize something, and when I say visualize, I don't mean just imagine a pink elephant. I mean, imagine a rose, right? Like, what does it smell like? What do the petals feel like? How do the thorns feel when you pinch it? What does it make you feel like? Does it smell good? How do you feel when you get your emotion involved? And then what happens when you let that go? And this is simply how magic works. You make a ceremony of your imagination and what you did. You get your emotions involved, and then you forget about it. And I mean totally forget about it. And once you totally forget about it and let it go, you might walk into the next room and there might be a rose on the floor. Now that seems like a coincidence, right? But after you do this enough, you're going to start to see it's not a coincidence. That you are casting a signal, right, out to the universe, and it's bringing it back. And then when you travel in the astral realm, you get to see where the signal is going. And so then you start to say, whoa, man, like everything in my life, bad, good, the ugly, I had a part in manifesting it. I don't want that kind of responsibility. And this is when you get into the conspiracy realm. What are we blaming the manifestations that we're doing now to each other on like a perpetrator savior kind of mentality?
Right.
What are we not taking responsible for? This whole COVID and vaccine thing and what's going on now, are we blaming the powers that be, or did we ask to be put in this kind of a place based on our actions, based on what we say, you know, the formulas that we cast every day? You know, when you go to the gas station and you're like, man, every time I give someone a $10 bill, they always, you know, they never turn the pump on in time or whatever, and you get angry about it. Every time this, X, Y, emotion, anger, well, guess what's going to happen every time you go to that gas station now, right? Like, it seems like a coincidence, right? But this is what the Bible talked about when the Word is alive. We don't know that we're little mini creator gods. And that's what we're doing in our lives. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, I know.
but to that audience, to the person who's listening, like I just want to reiterate, like now is unlike any other time in your lifetime. There is quite literally an integration which is being forced upon humanity. And that integration is just a reflection of a time of integration. We have that opportunity right now to really, really apply everything which we've been working on, like everything which you have done and seen has prepared you for right now. And now is the integration time period, whatever your technique is. So I want to encourage that. And by integration, that's like taking all of the different parts of who you are and like recognizing their order and their value, and like who's running the show in your journey. What's coming before us, like no matter how you look at it, life on Earth is going to be different in the future in a drastic way. And as we begin to recognize how much our inner world and our inner journey reflects the outer world, and particularly as it relates to flow, like this thing which is guiding us through this, that is going to really help in terms of the navigating. Like, you know, what do I do? Because we don't know, we don't have a model to compare what's coming on or what's going to be unfolding before us. And it can be a lot of fun. And my experience, and I would say yours would as well, is that when you do become more integrated, which means you are more receptive to the flow of life and you see it more, that will carry us, you know, to at least through the storm, and hopefully in the creation of a much more harmonious expression. And this is what I hold inside, which is like a harmonious expression between like the human being, you know, our internal relationship with ourselves, our relationship with other human beings, and then most importantly, our relationship with how we interact with life and earth. I don't necessarily mean that in any way which has been experienced before. I mean this in understanding like rivers and trees and all of this stuff may have a bigger impact on the flow of life than we actually realize.
It's a very powerful way to close it out, man. I really appreciate that.
It's called Carpe Diem, Morty. Look it up.
You look it up. You don't even know what it means.
That's because losers look stuff up while the rest of us are carping all them DMs.
Listen to your sister, Morty. To live is to risk it all. Otherwise, you're just an inert chunk of randomly assembled molecules drifting wherever the universe blows you. Oh, I'm sorry, Jerry. I didn't see you there. How much of that did you hear?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know, because I don't feel like people are as gullible as they're assuming. I mean, okay, let's say you've got 50% of the population that's gullible. You know, I think maybe up to 70%. That's max. But you can't rule the world with 70%. And so they have a real problem, and that's what they've come. I think that the powers that, you know, that were essentially the corporate state, you know, the empire that never died. That's what it's confronted in the last few years, is the limitation of its power. The fact that so many people resisted the mandate, so many people essentially resisted this, you know, this invasive totalitarian state that we've seen rolled out, and so. You know, they're doing their best to basically consolidate power, I think, within cities. They're going to obviously continue with their agenda for biofascism, if you want to call it. I mean, essentially, it's going to be merging, as Schwab talks about, the digital, physical, and biological identity. Well, a lot of people are under their game now. So, yeah, I think you're just going to see a splitting off of those of us that are like, hey, you know what? We are connected to spirit. We have never lost that intuition. We have never surrendered our sovereignty, in our souls to this beast, this empire. And I think you're just going to see a splitting off. People that are basically going to merge more and more with the technology. They're going to become basically part and parcel with all this agenda, the chipping and the invasion of your body through. I mean, the jab alone was already basically telling you have no sovereignty over your body, and most people didn't even get it. Those, let's say 2/3 of the population that got it, but a third saying no, and across the planet half saying no. It's a lot of people. Reality catches up to you. So all you want, they're going to use everything they can to manipulate, to control, but they can't control everyone. And that's where they're fundamentally going to lose. Every empire loses because it has overreach. And eventually it gets to that place where it tries to mine too much, to expect too much, to demand too much, to exploit too much, and it goes bankrupt in the process.
Well, what I find fascinating too about understanding intention is now looking at the law and understanding that the words that are being said are constructed in a certain way that everything here is an offer. And looking at people like Tom Barnett and a lot of people who do talk about this and saying that you're being shown that there's only one way to go about this, or this is what's happening, but all of it is an offer. And yeah, when you really break down what some of these people are saying, or if you read the actual laws or whatever you want to call them that they're implementing, you can see how they're building in the sort of escape door for people like us who are like, yeah, I don't want to do this. And it's all written in there. And if you really break down the way that they're saying certain things, they're telling you that, we're trying to do this and we can only do it unless you guys let us, and everyone's letting them.
Yeah. It's so fascinating how, we, Yeah. And it's like people's perspective can't even conceptualize and sort of look down on the world that was created for them. And, that's almost, I sort of use that analogy when we were going through the whole Corona nonsense, where it was like I've been expecting for about, 8 to 10 years, travel restrictions and injection passports and the rest of it. And it was like, okay, now it's game time. And now I have this sort of 30,000 foot vantage point of these events that are being played out. And it's like, holy cow, this is it. This is how they're going about it. And so it's very rare to have that perspective of, the events that are playing out in front of us, because so many of us, we're busy. People are busy. They don't have the time or the really context. Like I was talking about in the beginning. If you're talking to someone who's never heard of that the Federal Reserve is private, like how do you explain that entire context before they totally lose interest, or just don't have that attention span to follow along? And it's like, that's, I think, what we're dealing with. We have so much going on in our lives that we don't have the ability to sort of zoom out and take the bigger picture.
I've had a fantasy. I've had a fantasy in my mind for quite a long time, for at least 15 years. I've always had this fantasy of getting out of this area and just driving. But I also had this other sort of, all I'd call it is an anchor. There was an anchor which was holding me back from doing that. But I have this anchor of, the car I drive. it's broken down on me so many times that I've got like this internal feeling, whether it's justified or not. Like I'm like, I'm not going to take. I don't feel comfortable taking that car on the sort of trip which I want to take. So I've had this game which I've kind of played in my mind. Thing which I wanted to do, what would I want that to look like? So I pictured that car, and I painted it in my mind, and just like fantasy stuff, like daydreaming sort of stuff, nothing like too serious or anything. I just thought about that. I knew what I've thought about. So the long and the short of it, where I'm going with all this is, and so he's like, yeah, I saw this car, and like I kind of liked how it looked. It was on the side of the road, and so like I picked it up, and then like last couple of years they've been fixing on it. Like, hell, man, I don't know what to do with this car. Like I can't figure out what to do with this car. And I go and I look at it, and it's the exact same car which I've always been picturing in my mind. Exactly the same. There is a level of organization which is orchestrating what we're witnessing, and we are watching it so tightly, and we're just like talking about the practice of witnessing it and surrendering to it. So he's like, all right, well, I recognize this is your car. And he's like, well, would it be fair if I take 3 pieces of your art for the car? What does it look like when you are trying to find a new way in which we're interacting, but it's not fully developed? My artwork is friggin' good, and it's probably the most valuable thing. It was a fair deal. In fact, Scotty definitely got the better in the deal, but I got the immediate need. That solved its own problem. So tomorrow I pick up the car.
That is fantastic. That is insane.
So it's like witnessing, and that's what that's what what I want to do going forward. It's like, I don't know where this is going to go. I used to hold like a real him and haw about technology. Because I see what the truth of technology is, but that's kind of changed a little bit for me in the past month. Not that I think the technology is a savior, but I recognize that there's a way in which you can skim off it. I call it neo-Ludditism 2.0, because there's a recognition that at some point there's going to be no technology, and there has to be. But you don't have to be the Unabomber quite yet. And if you interact really, really smartly, which to me means no entertainment, well then the internet, if it's just a utilitarian sort of thing, well then that's something which I can work with. So.
But one of the big things we push is that if we want a different world, we've got to make that.
Without a doubt. And that can be kind of that's always a truth. And that can be a scary thing when particularly you don't have a model in your mind of what it looks like. There's been $1 billion industry since the moment any of us have been conscious in these physical bodies, which has been painting pictures in our minds of what the future is. The future's either this or it's that, or it's this or that. And if you're going off script, that's a scary thing. But when we begin to demonstrate and witness, this is the whole sort of like 4-minute mile principle. Like, as soon as we as human beings see, like maybe more than once, and sometimes just once, that it can be done, well then we literally can do anything. Like, I'm not trying to sound like a cheerleader, but they're trying to tell us that this phone which I'm talking on was at one point a bunch of rocks and dirt and wood. And if we turn rocks and dirt and wood into this like phone in my hand right now, we can literally do anything.
100% agree, brother. 100%.
Right? So recently I've encountered people who, they understood that all of this is not true. They understood the consequences of it for encroaching on our freedom. But yet, in order to like stay in with their group of friends who bought the mainstream false narrative, they actually went and got tested all the time so they could tell their friends they were negative. And they actually contributed to lockdown policies because of their getting that testing, right? Or somebody who is, you know, completely aware of everything that's going on and very much against it and concerned, but then works for a company that develops gene editing technology, which is going to be used to, you know, further harm us. So we have to, you know, really think about our actions and behaviors once we open our mind to the truth and make sure that we're not actually, you know, perpetuating the very thing that we're trying to protect ourselves from and fight against.